Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Apingo. I'm that Chinese history guy. And here we share the stories from the myths, legends, and histories of the Chinese people, from the first creator to the last imperial dynasty. More than 6,000 years of stories, one video at a time. And if you like content like this, remember to like, sub, comment, and share. Now in this episode of Shang Dynasty, we are going to talk about the ruler that finally pushed the dynasty to the peak of its glory, and how this golden age of the Shang Dynasty, soaked in blood and built upon the skeletons of countless lives, also ushered in the steady decline of their fortunes over the next 200 years. Now, when King Tanaka passed away after his 28-year reign on the throne, the Shang economy was well on the way of recovery, and it was showing signs of gaining more momentum and more strength. Now, the throne then passed on to his younger brother Xiao Xin, who spent the next 21 years on the throne. Now, here lies the problem. Instead of building upon the foundations that his late father laid down for the dynasty's revival, King Xiaoxin actually abandoned many of King Tanaka's policies and ideals, and thereby plunging the Shang dynasty into another, you could say, a mini period of decline. Now, when King Xiaoxin passed away after his 21 years on the throne was then passed on to their youngest brother Xiao Yi. Now, although King Xiao Yi was not as talented nor was he as ambitious as King Tanaka, he actually revived and reinstated many of the sound policies that were abandoned or reversed by his immediate predecessor. And so he ensured that there was stability in the kingdom. Now, King Xiao Yi kind of viewed himself more of as a temporary custodian of the realm, and he was very focused on grooming an outstanding leader to take the Shang dynasty to new heights. And to that end, he decided to send his son and heir, Wuting, to live as a commoner, amongst the people from a very young age, so as to help Wuting learn and understand the needs and concerns of the people. Now, after 10 years on the throne, King Xiao Yi passed away, and the throne was succeeded by his son Wuting around the year 1250 BCE. Now, as we know, Wuting spent his formative years toiling in the land just like any other peasants or slaves of the realm. And along the way, he made many close friends as he was growing up. Now, he learned the hardships that his people faced, and of course, he understood the concerns of the common man. Now, the lessons that he learned along the way, that he learned while living as a commoner, followed him into the court when he ascended to the throne. For the rest of his life, he actually lived simply and made it his life's mission to bring glory to the Shang dynasty once again. In today's parlance, I guess you would say, make Shang great again. Yeah. And that was because, based on what he's seen and what he experienced living as a commoner, he felt that the only way for his people to lead a better life would be for the Shang and the kingdom to be strong, to build strength, in all areas. And that was the only way he could see to make life better for his people, and therefore, he made it his life mission to make Shang great again. Yeah. Now, however, when King Wuting ascended to the throne, the first 3 years of his reign was marked by what is now known as the 3 years of silence. King Wuting did not speak, nor did he make any comments or declare any of his intentions in his first 3 years on the throne. Now, many speculated that he was, just adhering to the traditional 3-year mourning period for a deceased king and father, which left the affairs of states in the hands of the councillors and the ministers of the court. Now, others speculated that he was just overwhelmed by this position, having grown up amongst the peasants and knowing almost nothing about court life and being a royal. And of course, there were even rumors that said that King Wuting might have contracted a mysterious disease that rendered him unable to speak. Now, the truth was, King Wuting was more shrewd than most people would give him credit for at that time. He was just taking his time to observe the situation while keeping his cards close to his chest. Now, having just returned to court, King Wuting was indeed unfamiliar with the undercurrents or the political undercurrents of the day, and while his ascension to the throne was basically a peaceful one, his grasp on the position, his grasp on power was not actually secured. The descendants of his three uncles who held the throne before his own father could challenge the legitimacy of his claim to the throne at any time, and possibly repeat the political turmoil of, the chaos of Nine Kings all over again. Now, rather than diving headfirst into, making major changes and upending whatever system was in place at the time and stamping his own mark and authority on the throne, King Wuting used these 3 years of silence to quietly filter out the loyalists, to discern who were his supporters and who were the ones that harbored some other intentions and agendas. And of course, he started building his own power base, kind of under the radar over these 3 years. And by not declaring his intentions and keeping silent for these 3 years, it greatly confused, his political opponents, and it kind of like kept them in check, not knowing what he was thinking, not knowing his intentions. In a way, ensured that they did not make any sudden moves against King Wuting, and he just bided his time and waited for those who were impatient to make mistakes and let his supporters in court take care of them. So basically, he got rid of his opponents, or most of his opponents, without even getting his own hands dirty. I mean, if you don't call that politically shrewd, I have no idea what is. And all the while, his own supporters and loyalists, the numbers of whom were, growing by the day or the months, they got more and more anxious and urging him with greater and greater urgency to make his move and stamp his own authority. And the cause for King Wuting to rule personally grew to a crescendo at about the same time that he felt his opponents were sufficiently weakened and he could finally reign with a free hand with no worries about any unseen threats. Now, when he finally opened his mouth, the first order that King Wuting delivered was to break a very strict societal taboo, and he raised his childhood friend, in a way, this person named Fu Yue, from the status of slave, the lowest rung of society, from slave to be the grand councillor of the Shang court of that time. And the way he did it was that he used the reason that the previous king told him to do so in a dream. And of course, at the same time, he also installed his eldest son, Zhu Ji, as a high official in court. Now, here's an interesting little tidbit about Zhu Ji. Now, Zhu Ji was basically the firstborn son of King Wuting from his first wife, who unfortunately passed away when Zhu Ji was still very young. And while Zhu Ji enjoyed, great favor from his father, and he was made an important official in court earlier on in his life, when it came to the later part of King Wuting's reign, his stepmother started spreading rumors about Zhu Ji because she wanted her own son to be the heir to the throne. So unfortunately, King Wuting actually, believed in those rumors and those propaganda and misinformation, and exiled Zhu Ji late in his reign. And apparently, it was said that Zhu Ji died from hunger, while in exile. Now, back to the story proper. Fu Yue was made Grand Councillor to assist the king in the day-to-day running of the kingdom, mainly in the areas of internal affairs and economy and social development. And his proposal to model the government and policies after the great ancestors of the Shang people was actually adopted by King Wuting, and thereby it started this process of political and cultural reform of the Shang court to revive the traditions and etiquettes of Shang Tang's time, the first golden age of Shang Tang and Yin, right at the beginning of the foundation of the dynasty. While Zhu Ji was given the task to reform the protocols of worship and sacrificial ceremonies, you could say it's kind of like a religious reform. And these reforms, coupled with the development of writing and oracles of the time, push Shang society to the peak of relying on omens and oracles to determine the course of their actions. One could say that, this period of time, the Shang kingdom, the Shang government was almost like a pseudo-theocracy, because almost every decision, every policy was decided through oracles and omens. But also it was thanks to these developments that we are able to gain a deeper insight into Shang society of the time through the many oracle bones that were left behind to be dug up by archaeologists of our time. Now, King Wuting also placed a great emphasis on human resources, as we would call it today. So he consistently recruited talented people from across the realm to serve the Shang court, regardless of gender, birth, and status in society. Now, his massive recruitment saw an unprecedented wealth of talents serving the Shang court of the time that was actually never surpassed until the end of the dynasty. Now, among the core of his team of loyalists and supporters were people like, Fu Yue and Zhu Ji that we mentioned earlier. His military mentor, Gan Pan, was made a great general leading the army and carrying out military reforms for the court. There were other, great talents serving them at that time, like, Wang Chang, Qin Bi, Xi Shizhi, Hou Changhu, Hou Gao, etc., etc. And not to mention that his queen, Fu Hao, was a brilliant strategist and general as well. In fact, she was the first recorded, documented female general in Chinese history, and we'll do an episode on her sometime in the future. Now, with the help of such a talented team at his disposal, the Shang dynasty of this time went through an unprecedented period of economical growth, military conquest, and cultural development and political stability. Now, King Wuting understood very early on that the foundation of a kingdom is the economy. I mean, that still holds true today for any state or any country. And therefore, King Wuting placed a very special emphasis on developing agriculture in his early days on the throne. He needed to build a strong foundation that could support his future plans to realize his ambitions, to make the Shang great again. And therefore, King Wuting could be often seen in the fields, personally guiding the farmers in their work or supervising the production process. And he also conducted numerous ceremonies to pray for good weather and for bountiful harvests. Now, as mentioned before, the society of that time relied heavily on oracles and omens to guide their actions and decisions, and therefore we are able to unearth huge quantities of these oracle bones from the period of Wuting's reign. And the majority of these oracle bones were focused on the subjects of weather, harvest, and livestock. So we could see how much of an emphasis was placed on agriculture during that time. Now, when the efforts in stabilizing his rule and growing the kingdom's economy yielded the desired results, King Wuting then turned his attention to conquest and expansion. Now, to the northern steppes, King Wuting personally led an expedition to put down the nomadic Guifang tribes that had been raiding the northern borders for years. Now, within 3 years, they were effectively put down and the Shang borders were expanded to include their lands. Now, the two other nomadic tribes in the north, known respectively as the Gongfang and Tufang, used the period of instability during the chaos of 9 kings to strengthen themselves, and they conducted numerous incursions into Shang lands, going as far as threatening the western borders of royal land, which seriously threatened the political stability of the Shang rule and the Shang royal house, and therefore King Wuting ordered his generals Qin Bi and Gan Pan to conquer those lands and expand the Shang borders in that direction as well. Now, to the west, the Qiang or the Xiqiang tribes were old enemies of the Shang people, and they suffered the worst of King Wuting's wrath whenever they were defeated in battles. Now, with very few exceptions, and I do mean very, very few exceptions, all the prisoners of war taken from the Qiang tribes were used as human livestock in worship ceremonies as human sacrifices. Now, there were also many other numerous tribes outside the Shang Dynasty's sphere of influence that developed in the south. Back then, we would call it the Deep South. The strongest of which were the Jingchu people that resided around the Yangtze River and the Han River region. Now, as a show of force and to prevent these southern tribes from growing strong enough to threaten Shang rule, King Wuting again personally led an expedition into the heartlands of the Jingchu people and basically wiped them out from the face of the map, thereby expanding the borders of what is typically a Yellow River civilization right down southwards to the Yangtze region for the first time in Chinese history. And the survivors of this extermination campaign were all taken back to the capital as slaves. Now, apart from those campaigns mentioned above, the Shang Dynasty under King Wuting launched numerous other invasion campaigns and greatly expanded the borders of the kingdom. I mean, not only did they expand their borders, they also took the chance to take care of any external threats and, kind of wiped out quite a few different tribes and disobedient vassal states at that time. And of course, Queen Fu Hao would have led many of those campaigns, and it was said that she personally actually destroyed more than 20 tribes and vassal states with her campaigns as well. But that part will come in another episode about her. Now, it is said that at the peak of their powers, the borders of the Shang Dynasty during King Wuting's reign extended from today's Gansu in the west to the coastal regions in the east, and from the desert and steppes in the north all the way down to the Yangtze and the Han River regions in the south. Now, this massively expanded realm included the people from numerous different tribes from just as many different kinds of backgrounds, and the forced assimilation of these people under the brutal, I have to emphasize this, brutal Shang rule further increased the genetic variety of what is now known as the Chinese people. Now, the explosive growth of Shang economy and the massive expansion of Shang territories brought about the true golden age of the Shang dynasty under the 59-year reign of King Wuting. Now, this period in history was known as the Wuting Revival or武丁中兴. Now, however, not all was rosy during this time. While the economy grew at an exponential rate, the numerous military campaigns placed a very, very heavy burden upon the shoulders of the peasants and the slaves of the land. Now, taxes were heavy, conscription was rife, and various resources were also commandeered, willy-nilly for use in either war efforts or for sacrificial purposes. Now, Shang rule was brutal and bloody in the best of times, and it was especially so under the semi-theocratic rule of King Wuting. And based on the oracle bones that we dig up today by archaeologists, there were more than 1,000 documented ceremonial human sacrifices. And all these ceremonies used a total of, based on last count, was 9,021 humans were sacrificed as human livestock. These numbers were actually the highest throughout Chinese history. I mean, there were numerous documented events that used between 100 to more than 500 slaves and Qiang prisoners of war as sacrifices in each of these ceremonies. And not only were these numbers of human sacrifices used during King Wuting's reign unprecedented, we would be hard-pressed to find any other period in Chinese history that even came close to the numbers. Yeah, that was how brutal and bloody life under King Wuting was, especially if you were a slave. And so, it is little wonder that social stratification was rife during those times. I mean, slave and peasant rebellions were commonplace, and the oracle bones also documented many incidences of slaves from the royal household escaping or attempting to escape. Now, in one incident, it was documented that a great number of royal slaves actually managed to escape from the capital, and the oracles actually predicted that they would be all recaptured within 3 days. However, the prediction was wrong, and the escaped slaves were not all captured until 15 days later, expending a lot of resources and manpower to do that. And the enraged King Wuting ordered all these recaptured slaves to be executed in the most cruel way possible. And that was how swift and bloody the repercussions were. And yeah, like I said, social stratification, the differences between the classes, between the ruling classes and the commoners were really becoming very wide, the differences. And this basically was the beginning of the following 200 years of decline until the end of the dynasty. So, I mean, in a way, one could say that King Wuting's 59-year reign, indeed, it did push the Shang Dynasty to the peak of its glory. It pushed it to the golden age, but it also sowed the seeds of its eventual demise with this social stratification and the widening of social classes. And the Shang Dynasty will be on a steady trajectory of decline immediately after the reign of King Wuting, who was also known as the Shang Dynasty's high ancestor, or Shang Gaozong. Now, I hope you enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it, and if you did, don't forget to like, sub, comment, share. And if you would like to support the channel in more tangible ways, you can do so through our Patreon. The link is available in the description box below, and it will greatly help to keep the lights on around here, so thank you very much in advance. Well, I guess that's it for today, and I will see you in the next episode.